I'm so happy to be here, such an exciting conference, and to be here again with Federico. We've been knowing each other for many years now. I've been interviewing Federico more than once for Il Corriere della Sera, the newspaper, the Italian newspaper I work for, and then we had that conversation at the Italian Cultural Institute a few years ago. So I'm so happy to talk again about the life and the achievements of Federico and his last book. So the last book published in here in America in English is Silicon, as George mentioned, and the new book just published in Italy is called Irreducible Mind: Consciousness, Life, Computers, and Our Nature. Now it's only in Italian, but it will be published soon in English too, right? And so it is exactly about the themes, the issues that have been discussed here, from the very first presentation by Peter Thiel about artificial intelligence, and also this morning panel discussion about artificial intelligence. And so Federico will tell us what he thinks about all these issues later. But I think we start trying to know more about your personal experience, your personal life, and how you got so passionate about technology. It started when you were very young, a boy. You were 11 years old in Vicenza. Vicenza is Federico's hometown in Veneto. And you were playing and you saw a model airplane flying. And what happened?
Well, so I was playing, and this guy, old guy, probably was 18, but you know I was 11, so so it's you know winding up something, because I didn't know what he was, but he was winding up with his finger, you know, over a propeller, and then he lets go of this plane, and this plane flies. I mean, wow! I didn't know that a plane, a toy, could fly. I mean, the big planes could fly, but a toy. So for me, it was a revelation. It was a comprehension, a new comprehension. There is something new, and for me, was a beginning of a passion about model planes, because after seeing this thing fly, you know, freely, it was so captivating that I couldn't resist building one with whatever I could find at home. Of course, it couldn't possibly fly, and you know, the story is long, but essentially after my third attempt, I got a model plane to fly. And in the meantime, I bought a book that was suggested to me by the person that was flying that model plane. And so I learned how to build model planes by reading a book. It was the first book that I bought with my own money. And money was scarce in those days, and so I couldn't afford the kit. So I had to design, to figure out what I wanted to do, then make a plan, then buy the material, then build the parts, and then assemble them, and then make the model fly. By the time I was 12, I knew exactly how you develop a product. You imagine it. You know, first it's in your mind, then you put it down in paper, some sort of memory, and then you figure out how to build it, and then you build it, and you enjoy it.
So you got so passionate about technology that you disappointed your father. Your father was a famous philosopher, a scholar in philosophy, and of course he wanted you to study that kind of in that kind of field. And instead you wanted to go to a school to learn technical skills. So you were kind of a black sheep in your family?
I would say so. No. Well, yeah, I was. My father translated the Enneads of Plotinus, for example, from Greek to Italian. He wrote the history of philosophy for the high schools and also university in Italy, and many other works on Schopenhauer, Meister Eckhart, and so on. He was very much an idealist. I couldn't say it 30 years ago, but now I can say he was an idealist because I didn't study philosophy. By the time I was 4, I realized that I could understand machines, but I could not understand people. People can, deceive you. They're nasty. Machines, they do what you tell them to do. And, they obey. So for me, that a machine is fantastic. It does what you tell them. Which, by the way, is exactly what computers do today, despite what we say about AI. But machines were fundamental in my mind. Well, I wanted to understand them, build them, invent them, and then by the time I had to choose which way to go, because in Italy there isn't a single high school. There are several technical high school, people that do engineering or people that do construction building or accounting and so on. I wanted to become an aeronautical technician or engineer, and because I couldn't stand the idea that I had to do 5 years of high school plus 5 years of university to design airplanes. I wanted to be an airplane designer, so I decided to go to a technical high school. My father didn't want me to, he just didn't want me to, and well, I won.
Yeah, and you learned so well that when you were only 19 years old, working at Olivetti, the Italian computer maker, you were able to build already a computer on your own. However, you understood that you had to study more. You went to the University of Padua to study physics, and you even started teaching at the university, but then you abandoned your academic career to go to a startup and work in a startup.
Yeah,
right?
To a startup in Italy, which are rare, at least especially in those days. So I work in thin film circuits, which in those days were a way to do a sort of a pre-integrated circuits. And then I ended up in the States, where I took a course on MOS technology. That was 1966. I graduated in 65. And then I ended up finally in 1968 at Fairchild Semiconductor, after having developed the MOS process, metal gate process, not the silicon gate process, at an Italian firm, which in those days was partly owned by Fairchild, was called SGS Fairchild, 30% owned by Fairchild Semiconductor. Fairchild Semiconductor was the company that invented the integrated circuit, essentially the planar process, the idea that you could put many transistors on the surface of a silicon wafer, and therefore build many transistors at once instead of one at a time as was used before, so that you could interconnect them directly in the wafer, and that was the invention of the integrated circuit.
Yeah, and so at the Fairchild Semiconductor in Silicon Valley, you created this silicon gate technology. Can you explain why it was so important, this innovation?
Yeah, basically with silicon gate, you could replace the aluminum, which could not withstand high temperature, and create a self-aligned process, which will reduce all the parasitic capacitances of the transistor. The transistor would be 5 times faster. Also, with a technique that I had invented, you could make a direct connection between the silicon and the junction without metal, and that would allow to reduce the size of the transistors, the average size of the transistor, by a factor of 2. So you could put twice as many transistors on the same silicon area, half the cost. And also the leakage current was reduced by 100 to 1,000 times because we could subject the wafer at high temperature after everything was done, because the gate could withstand that temperature, and that would clean up the system and allow much less leakage. That made possible dynamic RAM, for example. And so with the silicon gate technology, all the missing pieces of making a computer on a chip became possible. Dynamic memory, the microprocessor, because the microprocessor require a single chip implementation of a CPU, which require much higher speed and also higher density to be made. Non-volatile memories could be made with silicon gate, not with metal gate, and CCDs. So with that technology, everything was ready for the integration that brought everything up.
Yeah. However, Fairchild was not able to capitalize on that invention, and that's why in 1970 you left that prestigious company and you moved to another startup. At the time it was only a startup, Intel, right? And only 1 year after you created the microprocessor. How come that it took only 1 year to...
Well, Intel was started by Bob Noyce and Gordon Moore, who were one of the treacherous eight that started Fairchild Semiconductor in '57, so 11 years earlier. And then Andy Grove joined, and my boss, which was Les Vadez, joined soon after. This happened in 1968, after I had shown that the silicon gate technology worked. I also had designed a chip, a device called 3708, which was the first commercial circuit using silicon gate at that time. So I had proven that the technology worked, and they basically took that technology to Intel, and from there they started doing memories. The company, Intel, early on, was dedicated to making semiconductor memories to replace the core memories, which were the technology for large computers in those days. And they had a custom project, which was for a Japanese customer, and it contained a chip, which was a CPU on a chip. The customer wanted also a CPU, and so in those days it was clear that eventually it was possible to make a CPU on a chip. They had partitioned the chip in three chips, partitioned the design in 3 chips, and an engineer there, was the manager of the application research at Intel, had figured out that if they use dynamic RAM, made possible by silicon gate, they could reduce the size of the chip to the point where it could possibly fit into a single chip. However, nobody at Intel knew how to design it, and there were 2 inventions missing before it could be done. Making the bootstrap load, it's a technical thing, would take too long to explain it, which I had just figured out at Intel, at Fairchild, before joining Intel, and of course what I call the buried contact, the direct contact between polysilicon and junction. Without those 2 inventions, you could not make a single chip CPU. So when I joined Intel, with my 2 inventions and my understanding of how to design computers and build them, I was able to do it. And that was early '71. Early '71, we had the first working 4004 microprocessor.
Yeah. I'm fascinated by the fact that you signed that microprocessor with FF, your initials.
Yes.
Why?
It was see, that's where consciousness enters into the picture. I had a sneaky suspicion that it was a good idea to put my signature on that chip. And I stop here.
What did your colleagues say about that? Did they notice or?
But there's my boss, noticed it. Actually, I told him. He said, "You sign your chip. What are you doing?" I said, "I did it." And that's it. He couldn't say anything. He couldn't say anything.
Okay. Then you left again. In '74, you left Intel and you founded your first startup, Zilog, right?
Zilog.
Zilog. Why did you leave?
Well, basically, Intel was a memory company that had not understood early on the potential of the microprocessor. I understood it. I was the one that pushed management, including Bob Noyce, to actually get out from a exclusivity contract that Intel had with the Japanese customer of the 4004, which was Busicom. And so I understood that this was the future. There was another custom project there, the 8008, which also could not be done. It started about the same time, but it could not be done because the engineer didn't know the inventions that I was telling you before. And so I took over that project, the 8008, and then the 8008 was an architecture done by CTC, was not a particularly good one, but it was better than the 4004. And so I came up with the idea of the 8080, which was an 8-bit microprocessor that was 6 times faster than the 8008. And it was really much more powerful. And that was what actually got the microprocessor to take off. But it took me 9 months to convince my bosses to let me do it. Not only did I come up with the idea, I wanted to do it, and they wouldn't let me do it. And so I said, not again. I start my own company. And of course, in Silicon Valley, if you don't start your own company, you're not man enough, right? So there was also that sort of I can do it, right? And of course, I didn't know what I was getting into, but that's all right. That's another story.
So Zilog was only the first of a series of startups that you founded, and one was Synaptics.
Yeah.
And in Synaptics, you worked with also
With Carver.
Yeah, and in Synaptics, you did a lot of research on artificial neural networks.
Correct.
Can you elaborate?
Yeah. Well, basically, at that time, of course, the computers were not fast enough to do the simulation of neural networks that we do today. Carver was working with sensory systems using neuromorphic analog circuits. And I came up with the idea that we could use floating gate transistors to create neural networks where a floating gate transistor would simply be like a synapse. So it would do it would do a multiplication, an addition, store a non-volatile value of about 3 bits, equivalent to 3 bits, and of course it would not require data coming from memory being processed in some processor and going back to memory. It would be done on chip. So essentially, I came up with the idea of a neuromorphic structure that you could do a neural network using this technology. In those days also I was studying neuroscience and biology, trying to understand how the brain works and trying to figure out a little more about it. And at one point I asked myself, but wait a second, I mean, these books always talk about electrical signals, biochemical signals, but when I taste some chocolate, I mean, I have a taste. So where's the taste of the chocolate coming from? They're not electrical signals, right? A computer, does it taste this? Does it have a sensation or a feeling for the signals that it has in its memory or in its CPU? Of course not. So where are sensations and feelings coming from? So this was about 87, 88. And so I discovered what was later called the hard problem of consciousness by the philosopher a famous philosopher that coined that term. Now the name escapes me, but because I had too much wine, but other than that. Dave Chalmers, thank you.
Yeah, and in fact, in your speech when you were awarded the Kyoto Prize, you said, quote, "Understanding how the brain works has been one of my personal interests since the mid of 80s. In particular, I am fascinated by the question of how consciousness can emerge from the operation of a complex machine," unquote. So can consciousness emerge from a computer or from an artificial intelligence program?
Now I can say a definite no. And I can explain it.
Yeah, please explain, because it is a
know,
very hot...
As you know, AI cannot explain itself, but I can explain myself. Thank you.
Yeah, go on, please.
Oh, you want me to explain?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm all for you. So here you go. So, well, first of all, let me say a little more about what consciousness is. So consciousness is the ability that we have to know through an experience, an inner experience. It's something that we feel within ourselves. It's not something out there, it's within ourselves. We know that we know somehow. And also we know that we don't know. And we know because we feel what we know. And the feelings are called qualia. The philosophers have coined this word, qualia. Chalmers was the first one to use this word and coin this word. But all it means is that sensations and feelings we know because we feel. And so to me then, knowing because you feel is great, but it doesn't seem to be enough, right? And when I was studying early on, trying to figure out how I could make a computer conscious, because in those days I was a materialist myself. I felt that, yeah, I mean, obviously the consciousness must come from the brain, because where else can it come from, right? If reality is made of matter, energy, space and time, objects that move in space and time, which is what physicists are telling. I'm a physicist, so they told me that, and I kind of bought it. So then, obviously, consciousness must come from the brain, which is what people tell us today as well. And therefore, I said, well, if that is the case, then I should be able to make a conscious computer. So it was a personal project at that point to try to figure out how can I make a conscious computer. And in my spare time, I was thinking, how can I do that? And the more I tried, the worse it got. I mean, there is no way that you can convert electrical signals into sensations and feelings. There are two different categories of, not even, one is an object, or at least a physical structure, but the feelings, sensations and feelings you cannot touch them, you cannot measure them, you cannot feel them. So how is it possible? Now, I don't know how much time we have, because I don't want to miss it.
I think it's such an interesting topic.
Well, I mean, no, because I don't want to miss the punchline, because I ran out of time, and I know that you guys are very punctual today, and so I'll tell you the punchline. If we have some more time, I can explain it. Is that okay?
Okay.
So basically, it is a long story, because we're talking about 87, 88, when I recognized that there was a hard problem of consciousness, trying to figure it out on my own, thinking about it, but I couldn't. I had an extraordinary experience of consciousness at that time that actually allowed me to experience myself as the world that observes itself with my point of view. So that kind of blew my mind. So now I'm the world that observes itself with my point of view. What does it mean? It means that in some way I'm I have one, the totality of what exists within me, and yet I'm also a part of one. So I'm the whole and also a part. So I'm a part whole. Now, if you think about it, you find out that our body is built the same way, because each cell of my body has the genome of the fertilized egg that made the body. So the complete knowledge of the body, of the totality of the body, is in every part of our body. 50 trillion cells, each has within the knowledge of the whole. Wow. Right? So also the body is a part, is built of parts whole. Each cell is a part whole, because he has the whole and is also a part of the whole. Is holography, is holographic. We have an holographic structure. We are part whole of one, of the totality of what exists. And that experience revealed that. It took me about 25 years to figure it out, what I'm saying now. But that experience was the leader of my research, my personal path to figure out what's going on.
You founded a foundation about
in
consciousness.
2011, basically then for 20 years I studied my own consciousness, my own experience, by going through all kinds of type of meditations, connecting with all kinds of other sort of psycho-spiritual paths or journeys, but I did not use drugs. So, because there are people that claim that with drugs you can actually have mystical experiences, but I figure that you cannot, if you screw your brain, sorry about the language, but how can you be sure that what you experience is really who you are? So to me, the actual information has to be clean, so to speak. You cannot, even though there are clear indications that drugs, for example, can be very useful for PTSD, different kinds of illnesses that can be cured with psilocybin, for example, and so on. So, but in my case, this was not the case, and they were all spontaneous experiences. But they gave me the contours of consciousness, so I could understand a sense of what is it, this animal called consciousness, and I arrived at a point where I realized that consciousness is not itself a thing. Is a property. Is a property of some kind of entity that has to have consciousness, has to have free will, and has to have also the ability to act. And the ability to act is the ability to transform an experience into a symbol. And so I ended up with a theory that was that basically the stuff of which everything is made has the capacity to self-reflect. In the self-reflection, it can know itself. But also, the stuff had to be also able to have a point of view, many points of view about itself. Like I am a point of view about reality, you are a point of view about reality, and so on. And so reality had to have two aspects: an inner reality, which is semantic, and an outer reality, which is symbolic. And then these entities that are conscious, they're actually self-conscious. They know that they are conscious, because then they can direct their own experience with free will. Then you can have a structure that can communicate with others, and to communicate, they need to use symbols. So now, the physical reality must be the symbolic aspect of reality, where the inner reality is the reality of meaning. So all of a sudden we have meaning inside and symbols outside. And these symbols are the representation of the meaning that we have. So when I communicate, I cannot explain what I feel, except I can use symbols to bring out what I feel symbolically. And then if you have something similar in your experience, you can understand these symbols that I use. So this kind of cycles of communication from meaning to symbols, from symbols to meaning, these cycles of communication is what we use to do what? To know ourselves, to grow, to express something that we have inside, which is our creativity, our capacity to comprehend. To know ourselves, we need to comprehend. All these properties, creativity, comprehensions, are non-algorithmic properties. They are quantum properties, and then I'll tell you in a second the theory that we have about this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because recently you had, with another Italian, Giacomo Mauro D'Ariano, you have developed a model that links consciousness and quantum physics,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And we don't have much time, but if you can summarize.
Well, Giacomo Mauro D'Ariano is a theoretical physicist, University of Pavia. Is about 65 years old, and he is the physicist that was able to show what was the dream of John Wheeler and also Feynman, but mostly John Wheeler. John Wheeler coined the phrase "it from bit," meaning that reality, physical reality, emerges from information. And D'Ariano was able to show that you could derive quantum physics from quantum information. 6 postulates of quantum information would derive quantum physics. And of course, we all know that classical physics, the physics of computers, is a reduction of quantum physics. In other words, the bit of the computers is a reduction of the quantum bit, which is the unit of information of quantum systems. Quantum bit is an infinity of states, like all the points on the surface of a sphere, and a bit is just 0 or 1. When you go from the quantum reality to the physical reality, you go through what the physicists call the collapse of the wave function, but what it means is that what manifests here in space-time is only a bit, 1 bit, for every qubit of the information, the quantum information that represents the state of the system. Okay, so the other thing that happens with quantum physics is that quantum information is non-clonable. It's a theorem of quantum physics that says that you cannot copy, you cannot know quantum information. Quantum information is defined as a vector in a space, in a abstract mathematical space called Hilbert space, which is like a vector, but in many dimensions, like n dimensions. And so it's an extremely abstract thing, but it has a property which is really extraordinary. How can you not copy information? I mean, classical information, you can copy a program of a computer, you can copy the data on a computer, you can copy. My words are classical information because they are shareable. I'm sharing that information. But quantum information cannot be shared. You cannot even know what it means. Okay, with D'Ariano, we created this theory that says a system that is in a quantum state, a special quantum state defined by this vector in Hilbert space, is called a pure state, but it's a technical term, don't worry about it. Just a quantum state. A system in a quantum state experiences its own state. It knows from the inside its state. So all of a sudden, with this connection between quantum information and experience, which is the knowing within what the quantum information represents, we have finally connected the inner reality that we feel, the physics has never considered even real, with the outer reality, which is the reality that is shareable, which is the reality of classical information. So all of a sudden, we have the first theory. This is no longer a model. This is falsifiable theory.
Is it falsifiable?
Yeah, absolutely.
Which kind of experiment would falsify this theory?
We are, now we are thinking about the experiments, right? I mean, you go one step at a time. But clearly, essentially a quantum state, which is a very specific mathematical structure, which is a vector in Hilbert space, a unit vector in Hilbert space, that means that vector in Hilbert space is actually describing an experience. But remember, the description of an experience is not the experience. A theory of reality is not reality. This is one of the problems with physicists and with in general with science. They confuse the theory of reality with reality. Reality is not the same as the theory of reality. Then there are people that say that the simulation of a theory of reality is reality. That's even 2 degrees of separation from reality. So my experience is private, non-shareable. I can only share with classical symbols, which are my words, but my words can only convey a portion of what I feel. Exactly what the theorem, Olivo theorem, is the theorem that says that you can get at most in the quantum systems 1 bit per qubit. So our experience is an infinity compared to what I can express, which is a finite aspect of reality. That's what we can share. But what I feel is deeper. The love that I feel for a son, a computer can use the same words that I use to express that love. Does it mean that the computer feels that love? Just because it uses the symbols that expresses my love? No. And this is the fundamental problem with AI and human intelligence. We know because we feel. A computer knows because it has data. That's it.
Yeah, so your answer is very clear about consciousness and artificial intelligence. I don't know if we have time for questions from... Two questions from the audience. Who wants to ask a question? Go to the mic, as usual. Okay.
This is fascinating. Thank you so much for giving us your history coming up to this revelation that you have been, this journey that you've been on. I'm just going to share my observation from what you said. As you came up to this point of looking at the image of the image of the image, I felt that what you were talking about was that you were looking at you were defining from a materialistic manner one's soul. That's the deepness of what you were touching. So I'm just going to leave you with that. That was pretty remarkable.
Thank you.
That was not just remarkable, it was absolutely exceptional. And I thank you deeply from my soul for what you have said. My question is somewhat derivative of that. You talk about the multiple layers that you can go through. Is there a fractal nature to that going deeper and deeper, or is there a boundary between fractal and non-fractal?
I don't know about boundaries, but certainly it appears to be a fractal nature. For example, as I mentioned, that our body is built the same way as I perceive our vaster being, which is a quantum system. We are a quantum entity. We're not a physical entity in space and time. We are a quantum entity. The body The body is not a classical system. The body is a quantum and classical system. The computer is a classical system. So we have 3 levels of realities. The body is in the middle. We need the body to communicate with the classical world, because my quantum nature communicates with the body like we communicate with a drone, so to speak, except the drone is quantum classical, and the drones that we communicate with is classical. Okay, so I communicate with when I say I mean the quantum me. The quantum me doesn't die with the body. The quantum me, so I don't need to download my consciousness to a computer, because I don't die, so I don't. Why do I need to? Why do I need to do that? And besides, a computer, the information of a computer can be copied. It has nothing to do with an experience which is private and cannot be copied.
No, we'll keep going. It's okay.
So,
keep going.
Yeah. So I forgot I forgot where I was going, but I think is enough. Is enough.
Here's what we're going to do. Two rapid fire questions, and Tanya, I saw you stand up and you sat back down. So Greg and Tanya, if you would like to ask a question, you don't have to, but Greg, go ahead, and we'll try and do a quick question, quick answer.
Hello, sir. That was extraordinary. Thank you very much. It was lovely and lucid. I wonder if you are familiar with Mark Solmes's work, because he gives, I recommend his book, The Hidden Spring, and his talks at the Royal Institute to you. But one of the interesting accounts that he gives to his solution to cracking the hard problem is that it has an evolutionary character. So he's able to explain why natural selection would select for organisms that have sentience. And I wonder if you could elaborate within your account how that would happen.
Well, yeah, in my account, sentient is fundamental. It starts with one, the totality of what exists. And the totality of what exists, now this is outside of the theory. This is the interpretation. It's like an hypothesis, a conjecture, because this cannot be proven. But one wants to know itself. So one, the totality of what exists, wants to know itself. Okay, in order to know, but one is dynamic and holistic, and the dynamism is essential, meaning that any instant one is different than the way it was before. So one is a continuing evolution. There is no static anything. It's continuous evolution, and also being holistic. When one knows itself for the first time, it must know the totality of itself. That's how it creates these entities that I was telling earlier that have consciousness, free will, and the capacity to communicate. So those entities are actions of one that knows itself for the first time. And so now we have a way of thinking where the evolution of reality is and of course, because these entities they have one within. They must have one within, because they are reflecting the totality of one, but with one particular way in which one knew itself. That's the point of view. That's like my identity, the point of view that each entity has about itself and itself about the whole, which was exactly the first extraordinary experience of consciousness that I had, that I mentioned earlier. So it reflects exactly my own experience, not just a thought about it, my own experience. So all of a sudden, you have entities that can know themselves just by being and evolving. So the evolution is the desire of one to know itself that each of its creations has. They all want to know themselves. And one knows itself through the entities that it creates, which are not disconnected from one, because everything is connected. In quantum physics, everything is connected. Quantum physics is is holistic. It's not reductionistic like classical physics.
Okay.
So,
I'm sorry, I want to get to the final question from Tanya. And a quick question, quick answer. And thank you so much. That's fantastic.
I have a very quick question. But did your father live long enough to see that you really returned to philosophy?
It's a great question.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah, my father is probably rejoicing wherever he is that his a black sheep son has recognized his search for meaning. Yeah.
So we can't wait and read Irreducible in English next year, I hope.
Yes.
Right?
And tell about Irreducible.
Yeah, we mentioned that earlier.
Well, Irreducible is a continuation of Silicon. Silicon talks about my four lives. My first life is, growing up, being born, growing up, learning about the world and so on. My first experience is in Italy. Second life, the life of an inventor and, a developer of products and technologies in the US, different culture and everything else. Third life as an entrepreneur, a life that took about 40 years of my life, my physical life. And then the fourth life is the life where I discover that there is more to life than just machines, and the exploration of consciousness, and and the first theory of consciousness, which is explaining Silicon. And so Irreducible is the expansion of that, and also the inclusion of this theory with Dariano, Professor Dariano, which really changes completely our understanding of what is real. Basically, quantum physics, physicists thought that quantum physics was describing the outer world. We are saying, no, it's describing the inner world. That's why quantum information cannot be cloned, cannot be known. It can only be known from the inside. So, this changes completely our understanding of nature. So it's not about consciousness. It's about what does it mean physics, and what does it mean interiority, exteriority. All these kind of ideas that we had before have to be rethought on the basis of this very simple connection, where the phenomenology of quantum information is exactly the phenomenology of our experience. So, that's why I cannot express all that I experience in symbols, because what I experience is so much bigger than what I can experience, what I can express in symbols. That's why classical symbols are limited. Our experience is infinite.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.